Hey, welcome to the Stockscores Market Minutes for July the 1st. This week I thought we should talk about two of the most high profile stocks in the market right now, Gamestop and Nvidia. Very different stocks, but stocks that are very well followed by retail traders. And I think I can give you some insight on where these stocks are likely to go in the near term. And in doing so, teach you a little bit about how to read stock charts. So let's start with GameStop, which, as we all know, had a big run to the upside a couple of weeks ago, got even higher than what you see here on this 2-week chart. What I think is noteworthy is that this week, the stock broke this downward trend line. That tells us that the sellers are losing control of the market and the buyers are gaining control back. Now remember, this is a very short-term chart. It's just a 30-minute chart going back the last 15 days. When you break downward trends from a new low, that's actually not that important. What matters more is when you break to the upside from a rising bottom. And we had that happen on GameStop on Thursday. And so that's a positive signal. The problem is it hasn't really gone anywhere since then. In fact, on Friday, it started to fall off again. And I think the reason why is the upside breakout didn't have strong volume. And that's a sign that there's not a lot of enthusiasm among the buyers. I think the sellers are a little bit tired. You know, they've had big drop from, it was as high as $70 in the pre-market one day, from $70 all the way down to, $22.50, $22.80, something like that, before it started to bounce back. So I think that the sellers are a bit tired. The people that are in the stock are probably in for the longer term. The short-term traders, not so much. What we now need is for the stock to break to the upside with some strong volume to show that there is enthusiasm. I think we have to remember that there's a critical catalyst potential for GameStop in the fact that they've got over $4 billion of cash. And at some point, they're going to tell the world what they're going to do with that cash. And that will be the catalyst for the next leg of excitement. Now, I don't know when that will come. You don't know when that will come. But the market's pretty good at predicting those things. And when the market starts to trade abnormally to the upside, breaking upward from a rising bottom, then you get a signal that the stock can go higher. So if we could break through this $26 level next week with volume, then I think GameStop is something to look at. Until then, I think you want to avoid it, but watch it closely because you never know when it's going to get going. Now, the next one we'll talk about, of course, is Nvidia. Very different stock. Here you've got the long-term 3-year weekly chart. And you'll probably remember if you follow my channel on YouTube here, that I was bearish on the stock 2 weeks ago when it made what I call a bursting bubble candle. In other words, the bubble is bursting. And the reason simply is you've got a parabolic upward trend. Anytime you go parabolic on the trend, where you're running away from the linear trend line, you're usually due for a pullback. And so we started to see that. I think at one point Nvidia's down about 12% from those high points. The question now is the pullback over? I read something earlier this week that said that a lot of retail investors were jumping back into GameStop after a few days of weakness, thinking that they were buying a bargain. And I think that's a bit of a mistake. Let me show you why. So if we go to the short-term chart, let's do a 15-day, 30-minute chart. You can see here that there was the break of the downward trend line. Okay, that's step one in a reversal. So you have this 3-day pullback, not a big pullback, but a 3-day move to the downside. You broke the downward trend line. But remember on GameStop, I said that bottoms are not made off of lows. They're typically, if you break a downward trend line from a low, it's not that important. You need it to break from a rising bottom. And so what we formed late this week was this rising bottom here, but we still haven't had the upside move. And so my concern is that what Nvidia is doing is what I talked about in the video a couple weeks ago, is that it went up, it's pulling back, and it's doing what we call a bull trap, and then it can move down some more. And what happens in a bull trap is it builds a falling top, and then that leads to more of a pullback. The reason I think that that's more likely, and again, we're only trading probability. When we trade the stock market, we never know 100% what's going to happen. We're just trading probability. And so when a stock does this, it does a little pullback here, it breaks to the upside for a short while, and then it typically will go down some more. And the reason is if we go to the daily chart, you can see that we're still some distance above this linear upward trend line. And if we go to the weekly chart, you can see that we've got a long way to go before we get to some of these longer term linear trend lines. On the weekly chart, we could go all the way down to 100. On the daily chart, 110, 112 was a reasonable target. So I think be patient on Nvidia. I mean, I think it's a great company. I just think it's gotten ahead of itself in terms of price. I mean, you can say that a Mercedes is a great car at $100,000, but if you're paying $300,000 for it, is it really a great car in terms of its value? I think that's the deal with Nvidia. Great company, great growth in earnings, but are we paying too much at $130 a share? I think it pulls back before it tries to go higher. All right, so that's my analysis of GameStop and Nvidia. Let's now do the same kind of analysis on the overall markets, because we're going into a slow trading week. We've got the July 4th weekend or a holiday on Thursday. Markets are closed early on Wednesday. They close, I think, at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And it's going to be a light week. But I do see signs that the market in the small cap area is starting to turn. We'll look at that in a moment. First, let's look at the large cap sector. And you can see that the trend is still up. And it's actually fairly linear. If we look at the S&P on a weekly basis, fairly linear. But remember, when we look at the S&P 500 chart here, the SPY chart, we're looking at the market weighted index. It's heavily influenced by the big companies on that market, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, so on and so forth. The small companies, or the smaller companies in the S&P 500, are really not doing that well. And you can see that when you look at RSP, which is the market weighted index, or the unweighted index version of the S&P 500. So now all of the companies, all of the 500 companies in the S&P 500 have the same weighting. And you can see it's a very different chart. It's not in that strong upward trend, but I do think it's likely to break to the upside for a summer rally soon. And the reason is the market is in a pennant pattern here. And the trend into the pennant is up. When the trend into the pennant is up, it usually resolves with a move to the upside. And so we're compressing volatility and building optimism because we've got rising bottoms. We just need the upside breakout. So I'm not going to be bullish on this market until we get the upside breakout. And again, we're going to look at the small cap sector in a minute because it's something similar, but it is improving. How about the NASDAQ 100? This is where there's probably more potential for a pullback because we are a little bit parabolic here. See how far we are above the trend line? So when you run away from the trend, you pull back. You run away, you're probably going to pull back. Nvidia is probably going to lead the pullback down to that trend line. Doesn't mean that it's all over for this market until we break the upward trend line from a falling top. I wouldn't get too worried. I just think in the short term, we may get a little bit of profit taking. Let's look at the short-term chart, the 1 month. And here you can see a little double top, almost a falling top. And this, at the end of the day, on Friday tells me that there's pretty good potential for the market to go lower in the next week or two on that NASDAQ market. The pullback being in those large cap tech stocks. Let's take a look at the Russell 2000 ETF, or long-term chart rather. See here, another pennant pattern building, right? And if we just break to the upside, which is what should happen because the trend into the pennant was up, then we should start to make some comeback gains for the broader market, which has really lagged those large cap tech stocks, the AI tech stocks, which have done so well. We haven't got the breakout yet, just something to watch for. I'll let you know when I see it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because I do these videos often. They're free, and I'll always let you know what I think about where the market is going. Let's take a look at the Canadian market. T.XIU, you've got a move up, a pullback, and you're trying to break the pullback. And probably we start to move back up into here, but I would say this is more of a neutral chart, just kind of a stuck in a sideways range. If we look at the short-term chart, here's the downward trend line, and you can see at the end of the week we started to move up from a rising bottom. So it's improving, but it's really not great yet. So Canadian market, be a little selective with it. Gold and oil, important components for the Canadian market. Here's the weekly chart for gold. It's up in the long term. In the short term, it's been kind of sideways. In fact, we've been drifting lower in gold over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Oil is looking better. Let's take a look at the oil chart. This is the weekly chart, and you can see that we're building what's called an ascending triangle. This is an optimistic pattern. You've got to move up, pull back, move up, pull back. But each time there's a pullback, the sellers cannot make price go down as much as they had the previous time. And that's a sign that optimism is building. And I see that in the price of oil. We had a nice comeback the last couple of weeks. If we go to this 1 month chart, you can see the strength the last couple of weeks, now building a little sideways pattern here. I think we're more than likely headed higher on oil in the short term. The long term still has that resistance that's going to be an issue for it to go a lot higher. How about the US dollar? Let's take a look at the 1 month chart. And you can see the US dollar moving up. So that's good if you are buying assets with your US dollars. But if you're anywhere else in the world and you're buying US dollar assets, they're getting more expensive. So things like gold, that hurts gold a little bit in terms of the global buying pressure for the commodity. All right, last one, or not the last one, GBTC, and then we're going to look at the last one in the bond market. So this is the Bitcoin chart, and I have some concerns here because we have a falling top. This is the weekly chart, and this week we broke the upward trend line. Now it still has support here, but Bitcoin looking a little toppy. I think we could see a more dramatic pullback coming back to that trend line. And believe it or not, that it could actually be good for the small cap stock market, because a lot of retail traders are in these things, Bitcoin, and some of the stocks like Nvidia. They're trading the options, Amazon. And so if money starts to come out of those things because they're no longer moving up, they're going to flow somewhere else. And that could be into that small cap stock market, which is starting to improve. Now, if we look at the short-term chart of Bitcoin, there you can see the weakness that we've had the last couple of weeks. I think if you're a short-term trader on Bitcoin, be cautious. Long-term, probably want to have a little caution as well. Now, the last chart we're going to look at is TLT, which is our bond market chart. Here is the short-term chart, generally trending up. Weakness on Friday, a bit of a concern, perhaps the bond market not liking Trump doing well in the debate. I don't know what the factor is there, but we definitely had some selling pressure in the bond market. However, the long-term chart is still working on a turnaround. We've built rising bottoms. We've broken the downward trend line from a rising bottom. We just don't yet have the enthusiasm among the buyers to send the bond market up, which would mean interest rates would be going down. So if we see the bond market firm up, I think that could be a catalyst for a broadening of the strength away from, the large cap tech stocks and into the broader market. And that's something to watch for. So my ratings then, bullish on both time frames for large cap US stocks and NASDAQ, but also some concern about a pullback as it's starting to develop, led by Nvidia. Small cap stocks neutral on both time frames. Canadian bearish in the short term, neutral in the long term. Gold neutral in both time frames. Oil short term bullish, long term neutral, slowly getting better on oil. US dollar the same thing. Bitcoin dropped my rating there, bearish in the short term. You could almost go bearish in the long term because that upward trend has been broken from a falling top. So I want you to be cautious with Bitcoin. Bonds, short-term bullish and long-term neutral. All right, let's take a look at the trade of the week. Relatively quiet trading week, not a lot of action. But one stock that did well on Friday is ASNS. And I was interested in it because it was trading abnormal volume, so I put it on my watch list right from the start of the day. It's hard to tell, but it was actually trading pretty good volume to start the day. Then it had this move up, a pullback, and the break of the pullback right there on a stock that was abnormal, trading with strong liquidity, and you can see it ended up having a pretty good spike on a really quiet Friday leading into a holiday week for the market. So here's a stock that was able to buck the boring markets with a strong move to the upside. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. If you have, please click on the like button, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, trade well.